Hey, welcome to this webcast. Jonathan Foust here. Delighted you are here. Couple quick announcements, then I'm going to introduce the talk. First of all, a big thank you to the Insight Meditation Community of Washington for hosting this, to our producer, Glenn Harrison, for getting this out to you. Rita Moran, our mindful movement leader, is traveling this month. So if you'd like to do mindful movement, you can check out her website, which I have listed on my Facebook page and on my website. I've got a newsletter, monthly or bi-monthly, that shares little updates, compendium of talks, my best photography. And finally, this is all offered in the spirit of generosity, of freedom. There's no charge. And if you feel inspired to support this, thank you so much. The following talk is part of a series on Am I Dreaming? Thoughts on Thinking. And what follows is an exploration of what's called bare attention, which is a way you can train yourself to pay attention in a way that strips away interpretation, that strips away the whole narrative you're creating and brings you into raw contact with the here and now. It's pretty juicy stuff. I hope you enjoy it and look forward to more down the road. Enjoy. Or close them gently. And with your eyes closed, you might reach your arms up overhead. Take some time just to stretch out through the left side and the right side. Sense if you can just work the wiggles out of your system. It's really nice to take a little bit of mindful movement here. You might like to do just a little exercise. I do this every night before I go to bed to help release the neck. That is to bring your chin over toward your right shoulder. No strain, no stress. Taking a long, deep breath. Let the chin drift over toward the left shoulder. Moving with the breath over to the right shoulder, checking the range of motion without forcing. And then flowing over to the left. You might find yourself making little adjustments. And then one more time, the chin over toward the right shoulder. Flowing with the breath as you drift over to the left. Head coming forward. You might bring your thumb and forefinger to right under the collarbones and then lift your chin. Look up toward the ceiling. Just get a nice stretch at the front of the neck. And then very gently bring the chin down to the chest. Again, no forcing. Go really, really slow. Gently lifting the chin up toward the ceiling. A nice gentle stretch. Down toward the chin to the chest. Once again, a little bit slower. Draw the breath up under the collarbones and exhale as you just sense the natural range of motion available to you as you bring the chin down toward the chest and floating back up the center. You might bring your fingers right under your chin and imagine you could just glide your chin forward, no forcing, and then pull the chin back. Glide the chin forward. Glide the chin back, chin forward, glide the chin back. And now just take a moment to relax and feel. You might sense in your own time if there's any little adjustments you might need to make now that you've revisited these sensations and feelings. And you might now turn your attention to your breathing. And if you like, this is optional, you might, on the next inhalation, inhale to the count of 4. And then glide right into the exhalation to the count of 4. Inhale to the count of 4. Exhale to the count of 4. Inhale. Exhale. Now for the next minute, sense what it's like to match the length of the inhalation exactly with the length of the exhalation. You'll notice it requires concentration, but also being attentive to the feeling on the inside as you breathe. And notice if this simple technique doesn't begin to help you gather your attention to what's happening in the here and now. Now for the next few rounds of breath, how much more intimately can you feel the breath on the inside? In your own time, and again, if it feels helpful, you might continue with this technique, but you might also let this fall away and let your breath now be utterly free-flowing, unrestricted, and natural. And notice where you feel the breath on the inside. Deepening the sense of the here and now as you soften the muscles around the eyes. And track the sensations as you consciously let all expression melt away from your face. And feel the weight and the volume of your tongue. Could you relax your tongue so fully that it fills your lower jaw? Sensing down into the root of the tongue. You might explore the following question as you sense from the crown of the head down to the fingertips and down through the toes. Is there anything right now that could relax or soften? Conscious softening and relaxing is this beautiful portal to arriving in the present moment. You might bring your attention now to the anchor of your breath, or the anchor of sound, or maybe the feeling in the palms. And for the next few minutes, give your job a mind to do. And that is to track the sensations on the inside, here at the point of your anchor. How intimately can you feel this breath? How intimately can you sense the vibrations of sound, or the sense of pulse or tingling in the palms? The experience of here and now at this point of contact. Is there anything right now that could soften inside? How intimately can you feel the details as you come in contact with your anchor? And can you sense who you are as the observer, as the one who is aware of what's happening right now? Noting the quality of presence right now, and you might just take this next minute now to release any effort. Is it possible to relax or soften even more? Could you relax or soften even more than that and sense what it means to let everything be? Nothing to do, nowhere to go, just simply to relax and allow. Take this time now to release your practice. Feel free to move, to stretch in any way that feels good. In your own time, you can open your eyes. You might stretch a little bit. Welcome back. As I've gotten older, I find myself looking back at different times of my life and having a very predominant thought. And the basic thought is, what in the world were you thinking? I was reminded of a time, this must have been, 1981, sitting in the Marseille airport in Marseille, France. I'd been in the Peace Corps, and I was very excited to explore the world of biking, of the experience of biking around the world. So I actually got in contact with someone who was putting a bike together for me, and I was going up to spend the summer kind of tuning the bike and just kind of cruising around France and Switzerland, and primarily France and Switzerland. And I had $300 for the summer. And I had been exploring playing music, and I had met someone who had played music on the street and had traveled for 5 years all around the world. And I thought, well, if he can do it, I can do it. So I had all this music that I had memorized, and I thought, well, this is my chance. I'm a naturally anxious person, but I'm also someone who falls into the category of what's called the counterphobic type. That is to say, if I sense I'm anxious about something, I need to prove to myself I can do it. So there I was, Marseille airport. As usually happens, I didn't have all my bags. So I just had one bag. I was waiting for another. It was lost. So I was there for like another 8 hours waiting for my next bag to show up. Now, before I left, a friend of mine gave me a really nice tent for camping, or lent me a really nice tent. That was a $300 tent, which in 1981 was like, oh my God, that's such an expensive tent. So I had this bag. It had the tent. It had some of my camping gear. I had my passport and the $300 on my person. And I kept waiting. The plane was delayed, and I remember getting up, going to check whether the flight was coming in. Coming back, my bag was stolen. I still had another 3 or 4 hours before the next plane came in. And of course, as you can imagine, I sat there utterly caught in obsessive thinking, caught in waves and waves of anger, caught in fantasies of revenge, and then just replaying what it must have been like to have someone sitting there watching me that whole time, waiting for me to get up, and then making a beeline for my bag, and then racing out the door, and the indignity of that whole thing. I could not turn my mind off. And I was so overwhelmed, I thought, I've got to come up with a strategy here because this is making me sick. And as I was just trying to meditate, with just sitting with my eyes closed with nothing to look after, I suddenly reflected on the suffering of the person who stole that bag. And I just started thinking about what a miserable life they must have. How miserable to be being a predator and looking over your shoulder to see if you're going to get caught. And I did kind of a deep reflection on the misery of that person. And I began to feel compassion for that person. And that sense of compassion began to turn toward a sense of gratitude for all I had, for the privilege that I had in my life. And what was an almost intractable knot of anger and revenge really flowered into something quite beautiful. I've been exploring over these last couple of weeks on this whole topic of, am I dreaming? What does it mean to wake up out of the trance of thinking? And we've explored some different techniques. We've explored labeling. We've explored using the senses as a way of sort of severing your identification with thinking and coming back to the here and now. We've explored the active investigation of thoughts, the active investigation of the related emotions. We've explored being the witness or the observer to what's there. And what I'd like to talk about tonight is something around actually using thoughts as a practice unto themselves. First, I'd like to talk about this distinction between thinking and non-thinking, which is kind of interesting, and a particular technique that helps you to shift from what we might call comparing mind into something called bare attention, which is presence without comparing, which is a very cool practice. And then this phrase, I ran across this phrase a little while ago. I just keep coming back to it. How suffering ends when gratitude begins. And finally, if I'm not yakking too long, I'd really love to talk about how to work with the highest vibration of thought, how to work with the thought of love in your practice. So a lot to cover. We'll see how far we get. I find this stuff really juicy, and I really hope you find it helpful. So there's a story of this old man sitting on his porch. And someone walks by, and this guy's just sitting there. And he says, "What do you do all day?" And the old man said, "Well, sometimes I sit and think, and sometimes I just sit." There it is. Sometimes we sit and think, and sometimes we just sit. So a little experiment, if you would. If you like, you can close the eyes. This will be just for a few moments. just a few questions to explore. You might bring your attention into your breath right now. Just notice where you feel the breath on the inside. Notice the length of the inhalation, the length of the exhalation, without trying to manipulate your breath at all. And now notice, if you would, the space between the breaths. Notice the experience and the texture and the quality of that stillness between the in-breath and the out-breath. Now, sense, if you can, I know this is a very delicate little process here. Just notice, if you can, the stream of thoughts, the commentary. And is it possible just to, maybe just even to imagine, is there any space between the thoughts? The next question. In your experience right now, what is changing? And the final question. What is it right now that is aware of what's changing? You might deepen your breath. And if you like, you can open your eyes. One model of how we experience life is to imagine there are certain streams that are happening. One is the stream of life force and the stream of sensation. And if you just pay attention to vibration, to tingling, to aliveness, you'll notice that it's an ongoing stream that's constantly shifting and changing. There's another stream, and this is the stream of thought. And when you can relax back and observe, you may notice that there is a constant narrative inside. There's kind of a constant voice that is exploring where you are in space and time, and keeping a narrative going, keeping a story going, where you are kind of at the center and you are maintaining your sense of a self. You're keeping that sense of self intact. Yet another stream is the stream of emotion, kind of the limbic system. And an emotion, well, what is an emotion? One way of looking at it is an emotion is a sensation inside with a label from the mind. How do you know you're angry? Oh, well, I feel my jaw tight and my pulse is elevated and my palms are sweaty and I can feel heat in the back of my neck. This is where I find somatic inquiry so interesting, because we're turning to really explore that stream of sensation, thought, and feeling. And quite often when I'm doing an investigation with someone, they'll say, I really want to explore how anxious I feel. And we'll kind of go into the anxious, and into the anxiety, we'll locate it. And for example, they might say, wow, I can really just feel like a tension in my around my chest, kind of going up into my throat. There's kind of an elevated sense of pulse. This is just nervous. And then I'll say, well, let's validate that. Let's verify that word. Is nervous the right word? Does the word nervous resonate with this felt sense of feeling inside? And this has happened numerous times for myself as well as for others. They'll kind of sit with it and they'll say, like, that's not the right word. I'll say, the truth is, I'm mostly excited. I'm a little nervous, but mostly I'm excited. That's a big distinction. Big distinction. The emotion of anger is always an interesting one to investigate because it's never just one emotion. It's a composite. You may investigate, I feel angry, and when you jump in and investigate whether that word resonates, you might find other words or kind of a composite of other words. For me, anger is usually a composite of disappointment, some kind of hopelessness, maybe some sadness, maybe a little despair. So this stream of emotion is a really interesting one. And then there's another stream, which is the kind of this different states of consciousness, like the different weather systems that are passing through. So we experience life through these data streams, if you would, through raw sensation, through emotions, through the narrative or the thoughts, and through different states. And again, it opens up this question: what is it that is aware of these streams? Can you locate that awareness? And then the question that really kind of bakes my noodle, these streams are always changing. Sensations, emotions, thoughts, states of consciousness, they're in kind of constant flux, either just among themselves or stimulation to the environment. If I sense what it is that's aware of this, does the awareness change? One of the really interesting inquiries in meditation is to ask yourself, is there anything in my experience that doesn't change? You might just try that on for we'll take 20 seconds. Is there anything in your experience that doesn't change? There's a very interesting kind of self-referential, external referential process that goes on. I once asked a group, is there anything that doesn't change? And someone said, yeah, the fact that everything changes, that doesn't change. So I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the different states of mind and a pretty cool technique. I remember joining a few people for some travels. This is a couple of decades ago. We were kind of in an exotic location, kind of traveling around by car. And there was one person who had an ongoing commentary on everything we were looking at. I remember we were at this beautiful open field with mountains in the background. And I said, wow, look at that field. It kind of reminds me of the movie The Wild Wild West. Did you see that film? It was one of the breakthroughs in Western cinema. That's really worthy seeing if you haven't seen it. A little bit later, we were by the shore, and again, commentary. He said, "Wow, those waves are pretty cool." This reminds me of one time when I tried to go boogie boarding in California when I was in college. Water was so cold, I can't believe I even tried without a wetsuit. But then I noticed when I got out of the water, I was really, really energized. And this was really before we knew the science about cold water therapy. I don't think I'd want to do it again unless I had at least a 5mm wetsuit. I think 3mm would be too thin. And kind of went on from there. And later, as we were driving down a really rough dirt road, commentary. God, this road is really rough. They must go through a lot of shock absorbers in this part of the world. What kind of maintenance do they do around here anyway? I bet their truck sales are really, really good. Kind of on and on. And there was something about this that was amusing. I found something really comical about it for about 90 minutes. But this trip was 8 days. And I cannot quite find the words to explain the murderous rage that started to build over time. And I didn't want to be unkind, but I remember offering as innocently as I could, how about we do this next hike in silence? One really interesting thing and one good thing about this whole adventure was that this person's process turned into such a cartoon. And it really cultivated a starvation in me and others for just simply being present, just simply being with what is. And this leads me to a practice I find really, really helpful for myself. I hope you do as well. I'd like to kind of guide you through it. And it's based on something called bare attention. Normally, when we notice something, we're noticing through the mind. And the linear rational mind does three things really well. It's a helpful tool. The linear rational mind does three things. It compares, and it judges, and tries to figure things out. Bare attention is the opposite. It's not comparing. It's not judging, and it's not trying to figure things out. So you can do this practice on sight, just on a visual thing. You can do it on feeling, but I'd like to lead this on sound, because I find this practice with sound can be very helpful, at least for me. We'll take just a few minutes for this. If you like, you can close your eyes. In fact, I'd kind of recommend you close your eyes. It's one of my favorite ways to enter into meditation, but it's a very powerful meditation unto itself. If you would, bring your attention to all the sounds that you can identify 360 degrees. Identify, if you can, the sounds that are the very closest to you. And identify as best you can the sounds that are on the very furthest edge of your capacity to hear. When you listen through this vehicle of the linear rational mind, you'll notice your mind noticing the sound, giving it a name, determining its location, and then very quickly determining whether it's life-threatening or not. Bare attention is about the experience of sound without a label, without a name. One way to explore this is the sense if you can experience the pure vibration of sound as it's happening. Imagine you are listening without a past and without a future. And while we're here in this practice, you might notice three characteristics of your experience. The first is how sounds are constantly changing. You cannot predict all of the sounds. The second is when you turn your attention to just one sound, you might miss all the other sounds. But if you hold a sense of open awareness, you might notice the orchestra of sounds around you right now. The third is to notice that the sounds are beyond your control. They're not personal. Take a few moments to relax and feel. And as you're ready, just notice what you experienced, the quality of attention right now. When you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. You may have noticed a few things in that practice. That when you tried to experience the sound vibrations as they're happening, your mind was not actively comparing or judging or trying to figure things out. You're in your experience without adding anything to it. I find this practice of listening meditation to be very, very helpful. And just briefly, it also points toward what are considered the three characteristics of reality, noticing that all phenomena are constantly changing, the characteristic of impermanence. The second is noticing that when you hold on to one thing, you miss other things. This has to do with the stress and dissatisfaction that comes from holding on and the freedom that comes in letting go. And the third has to do with how all this phenomena is not personal. It's simply happening by itself. So this distinction into the linear rational mind and this other quality of mind, comparing versus non-comparing, judging versus non-comparing, figuring out versus not figuring out, what's the point? We live in a world where we have to solve problems all the time. What I've noticed is there's an amazing power in your capacity to consciously flip the switch. When you can rest this rational mind in presence, there's a quality of feeling refreshed and renewed. It's the doorway, I think, to open into realms of intuition, to kind of sense what's beyond the mind and this whole realm of what we call Buddhi mind, the realm of awakened mind, the realm of insight. When you can rest in the presence, when you can rest in the here and now, You are, as Deepak Chopra says, opening into the field of infinite possibility, to this quantum field of presence that's outside of time and space and identity. I think this is what happens when we take the time to come into full and deep presence. So I hope you found that helpful. I find it to be just one of my favorite things. So here we are with thought, and we have this distinction between thinking and not thinking. We have this distinction from comparing, judging, trying to figure things out, to not comparing, not trying to figure things out. Now, an interesting thing is we have this tendency to feel that thinking isn't necessarily good, or we should at least be thinking less, which is a bit of an impossibility because, of course, we think about 60,000 thoughts a day. The mind just generates thoughts. I'm not sure who counted, but it seems about right for me. And I've noticed for myself, most of mine are not original. But there's an interesting element here about the quality of thought that I'd like to touch on with the little bit of time I have left with you. Because there are certain qualities to thoughts. There are certain thoughts that are wholesome. They kind of like point you toward a feeling of being more whole. And then there are thoughts that are less than wholesome. They kind of reinforce a sense of separation, or they reinforce a sense of greed or hatred or delusion. So not that long ago, well, actually, a long time ago. What was I thinking? This was a long time ago. I've shared this story before. Back when I was head of a big nonprofit, we had a big program center in New England, and the head of reservations burst into my office, and she said, "The new catalog has come out, and we are overwhelmed and swamped and stressed downstairs." And I could just see the emotion on her face. Now I just kind of run across this very interesting protocol about reframing, which is asking questions that kind of open up the frame. And so I pulled one on her. I mean, I did it with the best of intentions. I said, "So I hear that we're stressed, overwhelmed, we can't keep up with the calls coming in. Let me, if you would indulge me, let me ask you this question. What's good about this situation?" I kind of like, she closed her eyes, I could see her eyes crossing and uncrossing. And she said, "Business is good." It was such an interesting moment because suddenly it opened up another whole conversation around, wow, we've got all this business coming in. People want what we're offering. Isn't that amazing? And then we went on from a very different level of conversation to what would be ideal? Are there any creative ways that we could solve this? Could we turn this into some project that could be bonding and so forth? And we ended up feeling really, really good about it. So this phrase, which I had mentioned in the beginning of this talk, suffering ends when gratitude begins. Is that true? And what I find for myself is, I think so. I think so. When I can train my attention on what I'm grateful for, it changes my state. It absolutely changes my state. It's not like suffering goes away, but when I can revisit it in kind of a fresh way. There's a technique which I have shared before. It's one of my favorite techniques. It's from one of my teachers, Sri Tony Robbins Das, who did a lot of research into gratitude. He's got some really cool things to say about it, but he's got this very cool protocol where you reflect on a problematic issue, and then you explore what it's like to to stream attention to gratitude, to kind of like flood yourself with gratitude, and then to kind of revisit that particular issue. And I've used this quite a few times. Recently, kind of feeling overwhelmed with everything I have on my plate. I said yes to too many things in my life. I feel kind of overextended. I had a fever and poor health. Everything was piling up, and I was feeling really overwhelmed. And so I explored very consciously something I was grateful for, and to really feel it inside, and then added another, and then another. I brought myself back to the issue, and I had a fresh take. I had a sense of what I could do, and it was really about very, very simple for me. It was about slowing down, asking for help, about just cultivating presence. So I'd like to share this with you. This is juicy. If you would, you can close your eyes. You might take 3 slow, deep breaths. On the out breath, just ask yourself, what could relax or soften right now on the inside? Notice where you feel that on the inside. And if you would, bring into mind some problematic issue in your life right now, just something that's between you and feeling good. It doesn't have to be huge. In fact, you might choose something kind of moderate or small, just something that's kind of like bugging you a little bit. And if you would, take a moment to sort of describe that in one sentence. If you had to share with someone and summarize it in one sentence, how would you describe it? Here's the issue. And now, if you would, just setting that aside, bring into mind one thing, one person, one event in your life for which you feel grateful. Take a moment to sense if you can draw it close, as if it's right here, right now. Are there any images, any sounds or words? What feeling forms on the inside? Can you sustain attention on that feeling of appreciation and gratitude? Can you let it get big? Can you imagine it spreading through your body? Now, setting this aside and responding to the following question, bring into mind, if you would, can you think of another person, another thing, another event in your life that you feel grateful for right now? And again, a sense if you could bring it as if it's right here, right now. Letting play through any images, sounds, words, phrases, the feeling inside. Imagine this flooding through your sense inside. And now, setting this aside, bring into mind a third person, thing, event in your life that you feel grateful for, that you appreciate right now. And again, opening the flow of memories, of images, sounds, words, letting a feeling form on the inside and sensing how big you could let that feeling get. And now, if you would, sense, if you can, the simultaneity of these 3 things. Can you feel them simultaneously right now and let it expand even more to all the ways that you have been blessed in your life. All the serendipity events that have opened you to new adventures, to new insights. How big could that feeling get right now? And now, if you would bring your attention back to the initial issue that you described in one sentence. Recall that now and let yourself complete the following statement. What I most need to remember here is alternatively, what I most need to focus on here is, and listen. What do you notice? What do you feel? When you're ready, you can open your eyes, or not, your choice. I hope you found that helpful. Here's the big point. Our minds are thinking machines. They generate thoughts. The error that we make is we identify with those thoughts and we think all those thoughts are true. Some of them are, some of them maybe not. And so often in our practice, we fight this thinking process. That there's some belief in here that thinking is bad, and if you're meditating, you shouldn't be having thoughts. Well, good luck with that. But the question becomes our relationship to thoughts. And there are many skillful means, which we've touched on recently and more, about how to move from kind of the trance state of being identified with that thought stream and how to shift into wakeful present moment awareness. One of them is using your body as a tool. Anytime you're aware of your breath as you're breathing, there's a moment when you've severed your identification with the thinking process. Just a moment, a little millisecond. Anytime you consciously scan through your body, exploring sensation, you're shifting your attention from thinking to this realm of feeling in the here and now. We've also explored this possibility of labeling your thoughts, just noticing when you're thinking, just saying, oh, I'm thinking, and how that can shift. We explored this technique of saying hello to whatever's there. Oh, hello, thoughts of anxiety. Oh, hello, feeling of dread. Oh, hello, sadness. Again, severing your identification with thinking. This sense of being the witness or the observer to your thoughts can be very, very helpful. We also explored recently actually investigating the thoughts themselves, particularly when you have a thought that you think over and over and over again that calcifies into a belief, when it hardens into a belief. A whole protocol for deconstructing beliefs, which can be very powerful and sometimes a little bit disorienting. And here we've talked about this idea of actually using your experience of sound, for example. Is it possible to explore bare attention, where you are simply awake to the present moment without adding the comparing mind? Not necessarily easy, but quite simple. And finally, some thoughts are more quality than others. Sometimes it's very powerful to actually explore what it's like to explore what we could call a higher vibrational thought. When you ask yourself what you're grateful for, what's good about this? One of my go-to phrases when I'm going through a hard time is, may this serve awakening. got kind of a higher vibrational quality to it. And the whole piece we didn't explore, but we will in the very near future, is this whole systematic process of exploring the highest vibrational thoughts, which are the thoughts of love, the thoughts of compassion, thoughts of kindness, and thoughts of equanimity. When you explore the metta practices, the practice of loving kindness, you're actually using thoughts as a practice. And they can be immensely powerful, not only when you feel caught or when you feel lost, but they're just really pleasant, or can be. It can also be, a metta practice can be very, very dry. But there are some techniques I'll share with you on how to make it, juicy. It's my hope you found this helpful. I love these practices. They've transformed my life, and it's such a joy to be able to share them with you. I'm very, very grateful, and many, many blessings in your practice. Happy, happy trails.